Welcome back to another video, friends, and in this photo editing tutorial we're going to be taking a look at a complete photo edit walkthrough in Luminar Neo, and through this edit I'm going to be asking the question, is Luminar Neo worthy of all the hype? You don't have to look too far on YouTube at the moment to see that there's a lot of buzz and hype around Luminar Neo, but up until now a lot of it's just been conjecture based on what we've been told by the developer Skylum themselves. But thankfully now I have a working version of Luminar Neo on my machine that's going to allow me to do a full edit. Now while there are still improvements to be made because this isn't the fully finished release version, it's close enough to give us a really good sense of what the program is capable of, and I've got in mind a photo that I'm really excited to get editing, and so come along with me and let's see what Luminar Neo can do. At first glance this may seem very familiar to those of you that have Luminar AI. There's a lot of similar tools here, but there is a huge difference with the way Luminar Neo is working. I've covered it in other videos, but basically there is a much faster engine underneath the hood, but more importantly we can apply the same tool multiple times. And as I go through this edit, hopefully it will become obvious to you as to why that is actually a really powerful addition to Luminar Neo. So one of the first things I want to do is actually crunch that smart contrast quite high. The fact that there was a lot of bright light up here, things were getting a little bit washed out. And if I use the eye tool at the bottom here so we can see our original, and in this one you can see in the original that things are just a little bit washed out and a little bit flat. Now when you're doing photo editing, of course you can just grab the sliders and move them around and see what they do, but rather than taking a slide and hope approach, what I prefer to do is just be a little bit more methodical about my edits by analysing the scene and asking myself, what do I actually want to do, what do I want to achieve? And by doing that I can identify areas of the photo that I want to address. And the best approach that I find to work with photo editing is to split your edit into two halves. The first part is you address the photo globally. You look at the whole photo and you try and get it to look as good as you possibly can. And the second pass is more about your creative vision as an artist. And that's where I'll look at things like underneath the archway here, it's very dark, I need to correct that. On the foreground here, it's very bright, the stones are getting a little bit bleached out, I also need to correct that. And this is where Luminar Neo really comes into its own. So watch this, if I close down the develop tool here and then I reopen it, all of a sudden I have access to all of these sliders again, but my image now has those changes I made before applied to it. So what's the benefit of that? Well, what I could do is come in and boost the shadows up, so I'm starting to get some interest down here, a bit of detail. I could also bring the exposure up just ever so slightly. And because I just want to affect the area under here, now I can use one of Luminar Neo's masks. I can come in and reduce the size of the paintbrush here, and now I can just paint in this area, and when I release, that shadow boost that we created here is just being applied where I've painted it. We could also bring in a little bit of that shadow boost in here as well. Perhaps we might want to do that in the very darkest areas of the trees, maybe underneath here as well. And if we feel things are getting a little bit bleached out like I do here, we can have a little tiggle around with a smart contrast again. We can bring the blacks and whites down and just make sure that we're keeping a pure black point in there. Now what we can do is close it down, and once again we've got access to the develop module all over again, and now I can talk into these highlights and address this area over here. So I can bring the highlights all the way down, and now I'm free to paint this in just over this area here. So I can grab the paintbrush once more, click and paint. And my strength is set to 58 at the moment, so I'm not at full opacity, so I could go over that again if I want to. And now I'm happy with that, I can close that down. And this is a really cool thing. If you're thinking, oh, I might have made a mistake, how can I re-access those changes I made? Well, the edits are all accessible to you here. You can see that there's a number 3 above that, which means that I've applied a tool 3 times, or I've applied 3 tools. So if I jump into this edit section, you can see that we currently have the develop changes that I made last open. I can close that down, and we could jump all the way back to the beginning one, which was the develop raw options. And if I decided that I wanted to make another change here, so for example, let's say I wanted to apply a better profile than the Luminar default one, something that actually matches my camera, I could come into the camera neutral profile. And let's also say that we wanted to apply some sharpening to the base layer, and I'm just going to grab the sharpening, boost that up. Now do bear in mind that sometimes the rendered preview seems a little bit soft, and I think the thinking behind that is that you really don't need to see every single detail when you're working on the photo. Just a generic overview is enough, unless you're zooming into a specific area like this, and then it will render all those details. But when you're looking at the overall photo and it goes a little bit soft while you're doing some changes, I think that Neo is actually retargeting your computer's resources to the actual tool itself, rather than rendering a full resolution preview for you on the screen at that time. But anyway, you can see here how you can jump back to any of your edits and make further changes if you want to. Okay, let's move on. Let's have a look at Enhance AI. And as you guys know who follow my channel, I will always grab the Accent AI slider and crank it all the way up because it's such a powerful and useful tool. Let's look at our before and let's look at our after. And as you can see, that's quite a marked difference. We've got better contrast, we've got greater saturation in the colors, we've got a more unified look to the actual overall exposure of the image. So here was our before, here's our after. And just like before, if there's an area of the image that you want to apply this to with greater intensity, we can certainly do that just by painting this in. And so I'm going to increase the size of my brush just by using my right bracket key, click once, and I'm going to make a broad sweep over the arch itself and release, and then I'm going to do the same again and work my way more towards the center of the image here. And the reason I'm doing that is just to bring our eye more in towards this arch by utilizing the fact that this has made enhancements through the image, but rather than applying it through the whole photo, I've just localized it more over the arch here, and that's just helping our viewer's eye go more to this area that pops out at us. Now, while I like to keep my photos authentic, if there's things in a scene that are really catching my eye and annoying me in a landscape photo particularly, I will take them out. And there's really no better tool to do that than Luminar's Erase tool. As you guys know, Luminar really leads the field with AI technology, and being able to just remove stuff just by painting over it really is a big game changer for me. And so now I'm just going to glance my eye from the left to the right and kind of work my way around the edge of the frame and then towards the center. And if there's anything that really catches my eye that I find quite obtrusive and doesn't need to be there, like certain sticks, I'll just remove them. But one thing I really need to make sure I get rid of is my shoes here, because I took them off just before I got into the water. And while I was in the water, I got absolutely bitten silly by sandflies on my legs. Anyone watching who's been to the west coast of New Zealand will know exactly what I mean. And if you have, let me know in the comments. I've just used the deselect tool here, and I've just cleaned up some of my selections that I'm telling Luminar to erase. And all I need to do is click the erase tool. And there we go, those sticks are gone, but more importantly, so are my shoes. Now, I spoke before about my methodology for editing and how I split my process into getting a more realistic and accurate edit and then going into the more creative aspects. Another approach that I take is working my way down through the tools, and that way I don't overlook anything. Now, while not all of these tools are going to be useful for every single edit, oftentimes they are, or at least they're worth considering. So for example, Structure AI, what I'd like to do is crank it all the way to 100 and just get a feel for what it's doing. I mean, we can even go to the absolute extreme here and boost it up. While that is certainly too much, and I'm going to dial it back a fair bit, I've got an idea of what it's doing to the photo, and I'm analysing visually as I look at it, where do I want to apply this effect? And if I need a little helping hand, I can just use the eye tool here to toggle that off and toggle it on. Toggle it off and on, and I quite like that effect, but I don't like it with maximum strength everywhere. So what I'm going to do is just bring the strength of the paint mask down there to 41, and I'm just going to paint it all over the whole photo for now. So I'm going to get 41% of that overall amount that we built in before, and now I can build it up a little bit more just over the rocks, because I quite like that effect over the rocks particularly. And maybe just one more pass under here. And now if I toggle that off and on, you'll see that the effect of the Structure AI is much more pronounced just through this sort of center strip here where we have the archway. Let me go off and on. And then if I decide it's just a little bit too much, I can just ease that back, and I'll take the boost off a little bit too. I'm going to open up the color palette now and just have a little play around with this. As I've alluded to with the other tools, it's always worth pushing them all the way up just to get a feel for what they're doing. New Zealand has quite a strong association with nature and rich green foliage, and so I really want to make sure that that's popping. At the moment, if I reset that, everything's just looking a little bit tepid in the greenery, so I'm just going to crank this up just a bit. And while I like what it's doing in the greens, I really don't like the fact that it's accentuating the browny look to the water here. So what I can do again is just grab my mask, my paintbrush tool, and say I'd like this green intensity just added over the greenery, and sweep my brush over the greenery. And now if I toggle this off and back on, you can see that we've increased that vibrance and intensity of the greenery while leaving the water alone. And now here comes that power again of the ability to apply tools multiple times. Let me show you what we can do here. There's a couple of ways that you can approach looking after the browny orange of the water here, but I'll show you a couple of ways that we can work around it. By me closing that color tab down and reopening it, all of a sudden I've got access to all of these sliders once again. And now if I talk into just this area here by using a mask, what I can do is just decrease the saturation. I could grab the orange slider and just bring the oranges out, do the same for the yellows, and now I can just paint this effect in just where I want it, and that is just in the water. And to get the job done a lot quicker, rather than working with a strength of 41 where we were before, I'm just going to grab the strength slider, crank it all the way to 100, click and drag, and start painting just over the water. So let me do that pretty crudely. And just like that, we've taken all of that colour out, but that doesn't really look very convincing. And so we could either erase what we've just done. So effectively, we're just bringing back what was there before. So we can erase that mask just a little bit. And now we've got a hint of that orangey colour. Alternatively, what we could do is just reset this by clicking the arrow there. And that returns the water to the colour it was before. And this time, I'm just going to grab this hue shift slider and just start moving that. And as I do, you'll see that the water is actually changing colour. So I'm actually shifting the hue. So originally we had a very orangey colour, but if I push it this way, we can actually start to change that more to a cool blue. And then perhaps we want to grab the saturation and just crank that up a little bit. And while I don't feel that looks particularly believable, that is an option for us, right? I'm just going to take away some of this effect from around the edges. I'm just going to reset the saturation because I feel like that's getting a little bit strong, but effectively if I turn this off and then turn it back on again, you can see that we've been able to neutralize that very strong orange cast in the water. And now I'm not entirely convinced that I like what I've done here, but really this video is more about showing you the capabilities and options that we now have with Luminar Neo. And of course, the benefit of having all of our edits recorded in a list means that any future edits I make on top, I can always come back to this color tool that's controlling the water and make changes if I decide when I get to the end of the edit that I wasn't happy with it. As I cast my eye over the photo, I'm assessing brightness levels at the moment. And I like the fact that we're really bright up here where we're poking through the trees, and then through the center part here, we have a nice juxtaposition of the very dark cave curving over the top here, and then this very bright bit through here. But one thing that's bugging me is the foreground. I'm finding this very bright and very distracting. And so I'm going to take care of that with one of Luminar Neo's new tools, which is Relight AI. What I'm going to try and do is use the brightness near slider, and basically I'm going to be able to hopefully relight and darken down just this foreground element here. And that is doing exactly what I was hoping it would do, which is just darken down this area here. Of course, if you wanted to take that effect further, you could come in and grab that slider again with a secondary tool and apply a second pass of this. And again, that's just demonstrating how powerful it is to be able to reapply tools time and time again. So what we have at the moment is quite a literal representation of the scene as it was, albeit we have done a slight shift in the colour of the water. But that aside, this is very much a technical edit. We've got the photo looking pretty good, but we haven't taken it in that creative direction yet. And that's what I want to do now. I'm going to throw visual fidelity out of the window. I'm going to make this photo look like I want it to look like. It's a very magical scene, and so I'm just not going to be constrained by reality. I'm just going to kind of push this photo where I want it to be pushed. And I think that Luminar Neo is a fantastic tool to enable us to do that. The fact that we can leverage Luminar's really creative tools and use them multiple times and layer them on top of one another, I'm really excited to see what I can do here. And if you guys like the look of Luminar Neo and don't have it yet, you can still pre-order it at a discounted price. If you're watching this after it has been released, that's good for you because you get the full version, and you can download that from the link in the description below. If you've missed the pre-order discount, good news is I have a discount code that you can use and apply, which is at Sky10. You can use that in the link in the description below. That also helps me keep creating content for you guys because I get a very small commission from that link. It doesn't cost you guys any more. In fact, like I say, it saves you money. So anyway, let's press on with the edit and see what else we can do in the creative section. One of the things I want to do is embrace the fact that we have a bit of light bleed coming through the sky here, and I actually want to enhance that even further. And another thing I'd like to do is augment the fact that we've got this lovely layered fog coming through the archway here, and I want to accentuate that. I want to make more fog. I just want to push it a little bit further. And after that, we'll probably just throw on a couple of finishing touches. So let's address this light bleed up here. What I want to do is actually brighten things up. So I'll just crank the exposure up. That's probably going to be the easiest way to do that. Maybe boost the shadows up as well. Let's grab the white slider and start moving that up. See how that looks. Okay, I'm going to double click that to reset it because we were just actually losing the detail of the branches here. And I really don't want to lose the actual detail of the leaves. I just want to push them brighter. And another good way to do that would be through curves. So as you guys know, if we put a point on the curve and start bringing it up, we brighten our photo. And so obviously all these changes have been applied globally, but I don't want them everywhere. I just want them to kind of be happening up here around the sky. So again, I'm going to dive into a mask, grab my paintbrush, push the strength to sort of 36, click and start painting. And toggle the before and the after, before, after, and you can see we've kind of emulated a light bleed effect just coming through up there. Right, now let's tackle the fog. I'll close that down and I'll come to the Atmosphere AI tab here. I don't want fog, I know from experience I want layered fog because that will sit on the ground here, and if I grab the amount, crank that to 100, we start to introduce fog straight through the middle here, and that's intelligently placed based on a depth map that Luminar Neo has actually created for us. So that's pretty amazing technology that it can do that for us. And now I can just grab the depth slider and actually start to increase that and bring it forward if I want to, or bring it back so that it recedes more into the cave. Currently that effect is too strong, but I can combine the depth map that Luminar has created with that fog coming through with my own masking, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Surprise, surprise, I'm masking the effect in again. And I'll just click and start painting only where I want that effect. And then I release, and there it is. And if I want a little bit more of it, because I've only painted at 55% at the moment, I can click and paint again just to add more of that fog. Okay, we're creating a very ethereal and dreamlike look at the moment, so maybe we'll push that just a little bit further by grabbing the mystical tool, which, as you know, if you've used Luminar AI before, you'll be familiar with this one, and a lot of people really love this, because if I crank this to 100, you can really see the effect that it's creating. Something about it resembles the Autumn effect, but it's not quite the same. I do really like this, but obviously 100% is far too much, and we can bring this back down perhaps somewhere around that sort of 30% mark and toggle our before and our after. As you probably know, the viewer's eye goes to the brightest parts of a photo, and currently we have 3 of them. We have a bright area up here in the sky, which is pure white. We also have a very bright area through here underneath the archway, and we have a third area which I really don't like, which is the sand area here. While the wedge shape of sand certainly helps to lead our viewer's eye into the cave, it's far too bright in my opinion at the moment. And so I'm going to add yet one more develop tool, and I'm just going to bring the exposure down, bring the highlights down, maybe push the exposure even further. And now I've done that, looking at the whole photo as an overall, I like this quite dark, moody look. So once I've treated this area here, I may come back in and just bring that overall exposure down just a tad. So let's grab our mask tool here, and we're going to paint this in. And one thing that I'm hoping in the final release is we will see the return of luminance masks. Because this develop tool is dealing with the exposure and the brightness and just darkening down, what I can do is actually use my mask but with a lower strength and just darken down some of the areas that I also feel are just a little bit too bright and distracting, like this rock over here. And as you can see, I'm far too eager painting over this end of the sand here, so I'm just going to remove that effect just slightly. And let's come to the eye tool and check our before and our after. And by using the develop tool in this way, we've been able to do more of a kind of refined dodge and burn effect, just burning down those highlights. I'm going to add another develop tool and just darken that exposure down just slightly, because I did quite like that effect before. That was just one of those kind of serendipitous moments where you just move something in a certain way and you like the look of what you did. And here I've just created a basic S curve in the curves panel here, which just increases the contrast just a little bit. So now we've got a slightly darker version with some more contrast thanks to that last develop tool we added. The very last thing I want to do is come into the mood section and apply one of the LUTs. And just by a bit of luck, I really like that first one we've come to, Anaheim. It just ties all those colours together nicely, gives it a nice unified feel with that lookup table, and I'm really happy with that. I really hope watching me do this photo edit has been useful to you. If it has, let me know in the comments. I'd really appreciate that. In conclusion about Luminar Neo, what do I think of it? Well, so far I'm really impressed. I'm sure they've got a lot more to add to this, but the actual structure of the program itself is there. The engine, that faster engine that we've been all hoping for. And thankfully and impressively, I've not noticed any lag as I've layered one tool on top of another. Now I ended up with 17 tools all compounded and nothing really slowed down, so that's really great. And so overall, in terms of what we're able to do creatively and with speed now as well, I think that Luminar Neo is a real win thus far, so I'm really excited about seeing the finished product, but even now, before we're even there, very impressed. So stay tuned guys, I'll be sharing more on Luminar Neo. Anything else you guys want to learn about photography or photo editing, do let me know. I've got a lot of experience from way back when, and I'm willing to share it with you for free, so subscribe to the channel, let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers, fellas. Don't know why I said fellas. Ladies, you watch as well. But anyway, guys, choose one of these videos that's popping up around my head now and go and click on that, and I will see you in that video. Cheers.